A groundbreaking 2024 study from the Employee Benefit Research Institute surveyed over 3,000 Americans who had been retired for at least 5 years. The researchers asked them one simple question. Looking back, what would you do differently? The results were stunning. More than 82% said they wished they had started planning earlier. But here's what really caught my attention. The biggest regrets weren't about money. They were about time, health, relationships, and meaning. These weren't people who ran out of money. These were everyday retirees, teachers, engineers, nurses, small business owners, who had done reasonably well financially, but they still had deep regrets about how they approached retirement. And the most heartbreaking part? Almost every single regret was completely avoidable. Today, I'm going to share the 5 most common regrets from real retirees, backed by data from major financial institutions like Vanguard, Fidelity, and the Social Security Administration. More importantly, I'm going to show you exactly how to avoid making these same mistakes. Because here's the truth, you only get one retirement, and the decisions you make in the next few years will shape whether you look back with satisfaction or with regret. Before we dive into the specific regrets, I want you to understand why this matters so much right now. If you're watching this video, you're probably somewhere between 50 and 70 years old. You might be 5 years from retirement or 5 years into it. Either way, you're in what I call the critical decision window. This is the period when your choices have the biggest impact on the rest of your life. Decisions about when to claim Social Security, how much to withdraw from your savings, whether to keep working, how to spend your time. These aren't theoretical anymore. They're happening right now. And here's what makes this so important. Unlike your working years, you can't go back and fix retirement mistakes. You can't work another decade to rebuild savings you spent too quickly. You can't reclaim the healthy years you wasted being too cautious. You can't resurrect relationships you neglected. A 2023 analysis by JP Morgan Asset Management found that retirees who made just 2 or 3 key planning mistakes in their first 5 years of retirement ended up with 40% less financial security and reported significantly lower life satisfaction 2 decades later. 40% from just a few avoidable mistakes. But there's good news. Every single regret we're about to discuss comes with a clear solution. And if you implement these solutions now, whether you're about to retire or already retired, you can dramatically improve your outcome. Think of this video as learning from thousands of people who've already walked this path. They're telling you where the pitfalls are. All you have to do is listen and adjust your course. So let's get started with regret number 5 and work our way to the most common regret of all. Number 5. Not having a written retirement. Let me tell you about David. David was a high school principal who retired at 65 with about $600,000 in his 401k and IRA accounts. He'd been a diligent saver his whole career. He felt pretty good about his situation. But David never actually wrote down a plan for how he would turn that savings into income. He just figured he'd withdraw money when he needed it, and everything would work out fine. For the first year, he was cautious, maybe taking out $30,000. The second year, he needed a new roof, another $25,000. Then his daughter needed help with a down payment, $15,000. A long overdue vacation, $8,000. Before he knew it, he was 3 years into retirement and had withdrawn over $100,000. When David finally sat down with a financial advisor at age 68, he was shocked to learn he was on track to run out of money by his late 70s. He hadn't been reckless. He hadn't bought a Ferrari. He'd just been making withdrawal decisions in isolation without understanding the cumulative impact. David told me, "I wish I had written down a real plan on day 1 of retirement. Not having that plan cost me my peace of mind and probably a decade of financial security." David's situation is far from unique. A 2024 Vanguard study of over 50,000 retirees found that 63% did not have a written plan for generating retirement income. They were just figuring it out as they went. And here's the concerning part. Those without written plans withdrew an average of 22% more from their accounts in the first 5 years than those with plans. That might not sound like much, but when you run the compound math over 20 or 30 years, It can mean the difference between running out of money at 78 versus having security well into your 90s. The same study found that retirees with written income plans reported 46% less financial anxiety and were 3 times more likely to say they felt very confident about their retirement. So how do you avoid David's regret? You create what financial planners call a retirement income plan, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Here's what needs to be in your written plan. First, list all your guaranteed income sources and when they start. Social Security. Write down the exact amount you'll receive and at what age you're claiming it. If you have a pension, include that amount. These are your foundation. The money you know will arrive every month, no matter what happens in the stock market. Second, calculate your essential expenses. These are the things you must pay: housing costs, utilities, food, insurance, healthcare, basic transportation. Be realistic. Look at your last 6 months of bank statements and calculate the average. This is your baseline, the minimum amount you need every month to live. Now here's the critical question. Do your guaranteed income sources cover your essential expenses? For many people, Social Security, plus maybe a pension, covers 70 to 80% of essentials, but not quite everything. That gap is what you need to fill from your savings. Third, determine your withdrawal strategy. This is where most people get stuck. The traditional rule of thumb is the 4% rule. You can withdraw 4% of your retirement savings in year 1, then adjust that amount for inflation each year, and your money should last 30 years. But here's what the research now shows. Your withdrawal rate should be personalized. If you retire at 62, you might need to be more conservative, maybe 3.5%, because your money needs to last longer. If you retire at 70, you might be safe taking 5%. Also, consider your investment allocation. If you have 70% of your portfolio in stocks, you can typically withdraw more than if you're mostly in bonds, because stocks historically provide higher long-term returns. Write down your specific withdrawal strategy. For example, I will withdraw $2,500 per month from my IRA, adjusting annually for inflation. If my portfolio declines by more than 20%, I will reduce my withdrawal by 10% until it recovers. Fourth, plan for large expenses separately. Don't just withdraw randomly when you need money for a big expense. Instead, anticipate major costs: a new car every 8 years, home repairs, helping family members, and set aside money in advance or adjust your monthly withdrawals to build up reserves. Fifth, document your Social Security strategy. This is huge. We'll talk more about this in regret number 2, but for now, write down when you plan to claim and why. If you're married, document the strategy for both spouses. Finally, review and update your plan annually. Every year, look at how much you actually withdrew versus your plan. Check your account balances. Adjust for changes in expenses or circumstances. Now let's talk about what having a written plan really does for you psychologically. Without a plan, every withdrawal feels like a gamble. You're thinking, can I afford this? Am I spending too much? Will I regret this later? It's exhausting and anxiety-producing. With a plan, you know exactly what you can afford. You've done the math. You've thought it through. When you take your monthly withdrawal or pay for that trip, you're following your plan. The guilt and anxiety disappear because you're not guessing, you're executing a strategy. One retiree told me, "Getting my plan on paper was like turning on the lights in a dark room. Suddenly I could see clearly. I knew what I could spend. I knew I'd be okay. It changed everything." That's the power of a written plan. It transforms abstract anxiety into concrete confidence. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. Before you retire, or as soon as possible if you're already retired, sit down and write out your retirement income plan. It might take a few hours, or you might want to work with a financial advisor to create it, but that investment of time will pay dividends in peace of mind for the rest of your life. Now, let's move on to regret number 4. Regret number 4 is neglecting their health and waiting too long to do the things they wanted to do in retirement. I want to tell you about Margaret. Margaret worked as a nurse for 38 years. She was diligent about saving. She maxed out her 403b every year, lived below her means, and retired at 67 with over $800,000 saved. Margaret had always dreamed of traveling. She wanted to see Europe, take an Alaskan cruise, visit national parks, but she was nervous about spending her money. She thought, "I'll wait a few years, make sure my finances are stable, and then I'll start traveling." So she waited. She lived frugally, barely touching her savings. 2 years passed, then 3. At 70, Margaret developed arthritis in her knees. By 72, she had the beginnings of heart disease. The long international flights she'd dreamed about were now physically difficult. The hiking trips to national parks were out of the question. When I spoke with Margaret at 74, she was in tears. "I have all this money," she said, "but I can't do the things I saved it for. I waited too long. I sacrificed my healthy years being afraid to spend, and now I'd give anything to have those years back." Margaret's story reflects a pattern researchers call retirement spending paralysis, and it's incredibly common. A 2023 study by Fidelity Investments found that 47% of retirees admitted they were more conservative with spending than they needed to be in their first 5 years of retirement. They had adequate savings, but were too afraid to use them. But here's where it gets really interesting. Research on retirement spending patterns shows that retiree spending typically follows what's called the retirement spending smile. People spend more in their 60s and early 70s, the go-go years, when they're healthy and active. Spending decreases in the mid-70s to mid-80s, the slow-go years, as activity levels naturally decline. And then spending often increases again in the late 80s and beyond, the no-go years, due to healthcare and potential long-term care costs. What does this mean? It means the conventional wisdom of spending the exact same amount every year in retirement is actually backwards. Your best years for experiences, for travel, for active hobbies, for creating memories, are your early retirement years when you're healthiest. Yet a 2024 analysis by T. Rowe Price found that 54% of retirees delayed major purchases or experiences in their first 5 years just to be safe, even though they could afford them. And the health component is critical. The Centers for Disease Control reports that significant mobility limitations affect only 13% of adults aged 65 to 74, but that number jumps to 31% for those aged 75 to 84. Translation: you're much more likely to be physically capable of doing what you want to do in your 60s and early 70s than in your late 70s and 80s. So how do you avoid Margaret's regret? You need to embrace what I call strategic front-loading. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting you blow through your savings in your first few years of retirement. What I am suggesting is that you give yourself permission to spend more in your healthier years on the experiences that matter most to you, while still maintaining a sustainable long-term plan. Here's how to think about it. First, create a life experiences budget. This is separate from your regular living expenses. Sit down and make a list of the experiences you want to have in retirement. Maybe it's travel, maybe it's taking your grandchildren on special trips, maybe it's season tickets to the theater. Maybe it's an RV to travel the country. Prioritize that list. What matters most? What would you regret most if you never did it? Now calculate what these experiences would cost if you did them in the next 5 to 10 years while you're healthy. Yes, that might be more than your standard annual budget would typically allow. That's the point. Second, stress test this against your financial plan. Can you afford to front-load some of these experiences? Often the answer is yes. If your retirement income plan is solid and sustainable, spending an extra $10,000 or $15,000 in your first few years to take the trips you've dreamed about won't derail your long-term security. Remember, the 4% rule and other withdrawal strategies already account for spending throughout retirement. If you're going to spend a total of, say, $1.5 million over a 30-year retirement, does it really matter if you spend a bit more in years 1 through 10 and a bit less in years 20 through 30? Not really. In fact, that's probably the smarter approach. Third, pay attention to your health as an asset, not just your finances. Your physical health in your 60s and early 70s is an asset that's depleting. Unlike your investment accounts, which might grow, your physical capabilities are almost certainly going to decline. This isn't pessimistic, it's realistic. That means experiences that require good health should be prioritized now, not postponed indefinitely. The Mediterranean cruise is easier at 67 than at 77. The hiking trip with your children is more enjoyable when you can actually keep up. Fourth, give yourself explicit permission to enjoy your money. This sounds simple, but it's psychologically crucial. Many retirees, especially those who lived through economic hardships or who spent their working years sacrificing and saving, struggle to shift into spending mode. You need to internalize this truth. You didn't save all this money just to stare at it in an account. You saved it to fund the life you wanted in retirement. Using it for its intended purpose isn't irresponsible. It's exactly what you planned for. One technique that helps many retirees: create a separate joy account. Each month or quarter, transfer money from your retirement accounts into this separate account designated specifically for experiences and fun. When you spend from this account, you're not depleting your retirement savings. You're using money you've explicitly allocated for joy. It's a psychological trick, but it works. Here's what this regret really tells us. The saddest retirement outcomes often aren't about running out of money. They're about running out of time while you still had money left. I've never met a retiree who said, "I regret taking that trip when I was 68. But I've met dozens who said, "I regret not taking that trip when I still could." There's a balance, of course. You don't want to be reckless. But most people err too far on the side of caution. They're so afraid of outliving their money that they underlive their retirement. A 79-year-old retiree once told me, "The deepest regret isn't spending too much. It's realizing you could have spent more, that you had enough all along, but fear kept you from living the life you earned." Don't let that be your regret. Do the planning, make sure you're financially secure, and then give yourself permission to actually live. Now let's move on to regret number 3, which affects your daily happiness more than almost anything else. Regret number 3 is not building a social network and sense of community outside of work before retiring. Let me introduce you to Robert. Robert was a successful sales manager who retired at 64. He had his finances in order, his health was good, and he was excited to retire. He had big plans. He'd sleep in, play golf, work on projects around the house, and finally relax after 40 years of high-pressure work. The first month was great. The second month was pretty good. By the third month, Robert was feeling restless. By 6 months, he was lonely. Robert realized that almost all of his social connections had been through work. His golf buddies were colleagues. The people he had lunch with were work friends. When he retired, those relationships faded quickly. His former colleagues were still busy with their careers and didn't have time to get together regularly. His wife was still working and wouldn't retire for another 3 years. His adult children lived in different states and were busy with their own families. Robert found himself spending day after day alone, and it was making him miserable. When I talked to Robert 18 months into his retirement, he said, "I never imagined I'd be lonely. I thought retirement would be freedom, but mostly it's just me rattling around the house by myself. I wish I'd built friendships outside of work while I was still working. Now it feels so much harder to make new connections." Robert's experience is alarmingly common. A 2023 study published by the National Institute on Aging found that 24% of adults over 65 report feeling socially isolated, and the rate is even higher in the first 2 years after retirement. But here's what makes this particularly concerning. Social isolation isn't just lonely, it's dangerous. Research from multiple studies has shown that social isolation and loneliness in older adults is associated with a 50% increased risk of dementia, a 30% increased risk of heart disease and stroke, and higher rates of depression and anxiety. In fact, some researchers argue that the health impact of social isolation is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. Think about that. Being lonely is as harmful to your health as being a heavy smoker. A 2024 AARP survey found that 41% of retirees said maintaining social connections was more challenging than they expected, and 33% said they wished they had developed more friendships outside of work before retiring. And here's an important finding from research at Stanford. People who retire with strong social networks report 62% higher life satisfaction than those who are socially isolated, regardless of their financial situation. In other words, having friends matters more for your happiness than having money once your basic needs are met. So how do you avoid Robert's regret? You need to start building your social infrastructure for retirement before you actually retire. Think of it this way. During your working years, work provides built-in social structure. You see the same people regularly. You have shared goals and experiences. You have reasons to interact. When work ends, all of that scaffolding disappears. You need to build new scaffolding while you still have the old stuff in place. Here's your action plan. First, diversify your social portfolio. If all of your friendships are work-based, you're vulnerable. Starting right now, make a deliberate effort to develop friendships outside of your workplace. Join a club or organization based on your interests. Love to read? Join a book club. Interested in history? Join your local historical society. Enjoy hiking? Join a hiking group. Like to volunteer? Find a cause you care about and commit to regular volunteer work. The key is consistency. You can't develop real friendships by showing up once. You need to see the same people regularly, have shared experiences, and invest time in the relationships. Second, invest in your existing non-work relationships. Maybe you have a sibling you don't see often enough, or a friend from college you've lost touch with, or neighbors you've never really gotten to know. Now is the time to strengthen those connections. Schedule regular get-togethers. Make them recurring. First Tuesday of every month, whatever works. Consistency transforms acquaintances into friends. Third, consider couples versus individual friendships. If you're married, it's important to have friendships as a couple, but also to have your own individual friends. When you retire, you and your spouse will be spending a lot more time together. That's wonderful. But you also need your own separate social outlets. Many retirees find that they need individual activities and friendships to maintain their own sense of identity and to have things to talk about with their spouse. If you do everything together, you can actually end up with less to connect about. Fourth, think about age diversity in your friendships. While friends your own age share your life stage and experiences, having friends of different ages keeps you engaged and connected to different perspectives. Some of the happiest retirees I know have friends ranging from their 30s to their 80s. Fifth, plan for the transition. If you're within a few years of retirement, start now. Join organizations, develop hobbies, build friendships. By the time you retire, you should already have a social calendar with regular commitments and activities that have nothing to do with work. And if you're already retired and feeling isolated like Robert, it's not too late, but you need to be proactive. You can't wait for friendships to come to you. You have to put yourself in situations where friendships can develop. Try multiple activities until you find something that clicks. Not every group or club will be a good fit. That's okay. Keep trying. Say yes to invitations, even when it feels easier to stay home. Make the first move to invite people to do things. Here's the deeper truth about this regret. Retirement isn't just a financial transition. It's a complete life transition. You're losing a major source of identity, structure, and social connection. If you don't actively replace those things, you'll feel lost no matter how much money you have in the bank. I've met retirees with modest savings who are thriving because they have rich social lives, and I've met retirees with millions who are miserable because they're isolated. One 70-year-old woman told me, "I thought retirement was about having enough money. It's really about having enough reasons to get out of bed in the morning. And for me, my friends and community are those reasons." Your social connections aren't a luxury. They're essential infrastructure for a successful retirement. Build that infrastructure now, while you still have time and energy to do it well. Now, let's move on to regret number 2, which involves one of the biggest and most irreversible financial decisions you'll make. Regret number 2 is claiming Social Security too early. Let me tell you about Linda and Tom. They were both 62 when Linda retired from her job as an administrative assistant. Tom had retired a year earlier. They'd saved some money, about $300,000, but they were worried it wouldn't be enough. When Linda retired, she immediately filed for Social Security. Her benefit at 62 was $1,400 per month. Tom had filed the previous year and was receiving $1,600 per month. Together, they had $3,000 a month from Social Security, plus they could withdraw from their savings when needed. It seemed like a reasonable plan. They needed the income and the money was available, so why wait? Fast forward to today. Linda and Tom are now 74 and 75. Here's what they've learned. If Linda had waited until her full retirement age of 67, her monthly benefit would have been $2,000 instead of $1,400, $600 more per month. If she'd waited until 70, it would have been $2,440, over $1,000 more per month. That's not a one-time difference. That's every single month for the rest of her life with cost of living adjustments. At this point, Linda and Tom have left over $70,000 on the table, and that number grows by $12,000 every year. By the time they're 85, they'll have missed out on well over $200,000 in benefits. Tom told me with real anguish in his voice, "We filed early because we thought we needed the money right away. Looking back, we could have tightened our belt for a few years or withdrawn a bit more from savings. That would have been temporary. But this Social Security decision, this is permanent. We'll be receiving less money every month for the rest of our lives. It's the biggest financial regret I have." Linda and Tom's situation is tragically common. According to Social Security Administration data, approximately 70% of retirees claim benefits before their full retirement age. Most claim at 62, the earliest possible age. But here's what most people don't understand. The reduction for claiming early is significant and permanent. If your full retirement age is 67 and you claim at 62, your benefit is reduced by 30%. That means if you were entitled to $2,000 at 67, you'll only receive $1,400 at 62. Forever. On the flip side, if you delay claiming beyond your full retirement age up to age 70, your benefit increases by 8% per year. That's guaranteed 8% growth, with no market risk. You won't find that return anywhere else. Let's make this concrete with numbers. The average Social Security benefit at full retirement age is about $2,000 per month. Here's what you'd receive depending on when you claim. At 62, about $1,400 per month. At 67, about $2,000 per month. At 70, about $2,480 per month. Over a 25-year retirement from age 62 to 87, here's the total you'd receive. Claiming at 62, about $420,000. Claiming at 67, about $480,000. Claiming at 70, about $504,000. That's over $80,000 difference between claiming at 62 versus 70. And remember, these benefits increase with inflation, so the real difference is even larger. A comprehensive 2023 study by United Income analyzed the claiming decisions of tens of thousands of retirees and concluded that 96% of retirees would have been better off financially if they had delayed claiming beyond when they actually did. 96%. So how do you avoid this regret? You need to think strategically about Social Security, not just claim it as soon as you can. Here's what you need to understand. First, separate your retirement date from your Social Security claiming date. Just because you stop working doesn't mean you have to claim Social Security immediately. These are two different decisions. If you retire at 62 but wait until 67 or 70 to claim Social Security, yes, you'll need to withdraw more from your savings in those early years, but you'll be rewarded with a much higher benefit for the rest of your life. Think of it this way. You're using your savings to buy a higher lifetime income. That's often a very smart investment. Second, do the break-even analysis, but don't let it be your only consideration. The break-even age, when the total benefits from delaying equal the total you'd have received by claiming early, is typically around age 80. Many people think, well, I might not live to 80, so I should take it early. But that's backwards thinking. Here's why. If you live a shorter life, you'll have plenty of other money to leave your heirs, your retirement accounts, your home equity, whatever else you've saved. But if you live a long life, which is increasingly likely with modern medicine, you'll be very glad you have that higher Social Security income in your 80s and 90s when you might not have much else left. Social Security is longevity insurance. It pays you as long as you live. The longer you live, the more valuable it becomes. You should optimize for the scenario where you live a long time, not a short one. Third, if you're married, think about survivor benefits. When one spouse dies, the surviving spouse receives the higher of the two Social Security benefits, not both. This means The higher earner should usually delay claiming as long as possible, because that higher benefit will eventually become the survivor benefit for whichever spouse lives longer. A common strategy: the lower earner claims at their full retirement age, providing some income. The higher earner waits until 70 to maximize the benefit. This gives the couple some income while also maxing out the survivor benefit. Fourth, consider your health and longevity factors. The break-even analysis assumes average life expectancy, but what about your specific situation? If you're in poor health or have a family history of early death, claiming earlier might make sense. But if you're healthy, don't smoke, exercise regularly, and have longevity in your family, the odds are good that you'll live well into your 80s or beyond. In that case, delaying is likely the smart move. Fifth, understand the tax implications. Social Security benefits can be taxable depending on your other income. In some cases, careful planning about when to claim Social Security and when to withdraw from retirement accounts can significantly reduce your lifetime tax bill. This is complex enough that it's often worth consulting with a financial advisor or tax professional. Let's talk about what this regret really reveals. The decision of when to claim Social Security often comes down to fear versus strategy. Fear says, the government might run out of money, the program might change, I might die young, I need money now, better take it while I can. Strategy says, Social Security is designed to provide more to those who delay. I can bridge the gap with savings if needed. If I live a long life, this decision will be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's what a 68-year-old man told me. I claimed at 62 out of fear. I was afraid of everything. The government, the stock market, my health, running out of money. 7 years later, I realized that fear cost me dearly. I gave up tens of thousands of dollars in benefits because I was scared. If I could go back, I'd tell my younger self, don't make permanent decisions based on temporary fears. That's wisdom worth remembering. For most people, delaying Social Security is one of the highest return, lowest risk financial decisions you can make. It's guaranteed income growth with inflation protection that lasts your entire life. Yes, you might need to be more careful with spending in your early 60s or withdraw a bit more from your savings, but that temporary adjustment often leads to decades of higher income and greater security. If you're not yet 62, start planning now for how you'll bridge the gap if you delay claiming. If you're between 62 and 70 and haven't claimed yet, seriously consider waiting as long as you can. If you've already claimed, you can't undo it. But you can make sure you don't have any other regrets on this list. Now let's move on to the number one regret, the one that surprised me most when I started researching this topic. The number one regret of retirees is not having a clear sense of purpose and meaning in retirement, not retiring to something that matters, but only retiring from work. I want to tell you about James. James was a successful accountant who retired at 66. He had everything figured out financially. He had a solid pension, good savings, and he'd delayed Social Security to get a higher benefit. By all objective measures, he'd done everything right. James thought retirement would be paradise. No more deadlines, no more difficult clients, no more tax season stress. Just freedom to do whatever he wanted. For the first few months it was wonderful. He slept in, he played golf. He worked on projects around the house, he watched TV, he read. It felt like a long vacation. But around the 6-month mark, something shifted. James started feeling restless, then bored, then empty. He'd spent 40 years being the guy who solved complex financial problems. He was respected by his clients. He mentored younger accountants. He had status and identity. People valued his expertise. Now he was just retired. Nobody needed him. He had no problems to solve, no challenges, no goals. Days blurred together. He found himself watching TV for hours just to fill the time, and he wasn't even enjoying it. When James came to see me 2 years into retirement, he was clinically depressed. I thought retirement would make me happy, he said, but I feel useless. I feel like I don't matter anymore. I'd give anything to have a sense of purpose again. I wish someone had told me that I needed a reason to retire, not just financial permission. James's experience represents the number one regret, and it's one that often blindsides people who did everything else right. A landmark 2024 study, published in the Journal of Financial Planning, surveyed over 4,000 retirees who'd been retired for at least 3 years. When asked about their biggest regret, 46% said it was related to purpose, meaning and identity, not money. These weren't people struggling financially, these were people struggling psychologically with the transition to a life without work. Research from the Harvard Study of Adult Development, one of the longest-running studies on happiness, found that having a sense of purpose is one of the strongest predictors of well-being in later life. More predictive than income, more predictive than health status. And here's a sobering statistic. A 2023 analysis in the American Journal of Epidemiology found that men who retired with no clear purpose had a 43% higher risk of mortality in the first few years after retirement, compared to those who retired with clear post-work goals and activities. Let that sink in. Not having purpose in retirement isn't just about happiness. It can literally affect how long you live. The problem is what researchers call retirement identity crisis. For many people, especially those who had successful careers, their job was central to their identity. They were the lawyer, the teacher, the manager. That's how they introduced themselves. That's how they thought about themselves. When that identity disappears, many people feel lost. They don't know who they are anymore if they're not their job title. So how do you avoid this regret? You need to build what I call a portfolio of purpose before you retire. Let me be very clear. I'm not saying you need to work forever. I'm saying you need to retire to something, not just from something. Here's how to create your portfolio of purpose. First, start your identity transition before you retire. While you're still working, begin shifting how you think about yourself. You're not just your job title. You're a person with multiple dimensions. Start sentences with I instead of your job title. Instead of I'm a teacher, say I'm someone who loves helping people learn. Instead of I'm an engineer, say I'm someone who loves solving complex problems. This might sound like a small linguistic shift, but it's profound. It separates your identity from your employment status. When you retire, you don't lose who you are. You just lose one avenue for expressing who you are. Second, identify your core values and what gives you meaning. Sit down and really think about this. What makes you feel fulfilled? What activities make you lose track of time? What would you do even if nobody paid you? Maybe it's teaching others. Maybe it's creating things with your hands. Maybe it's being in nature. Maybe it's helping people solve problems. Maybe it's learning new things. Maybe it's making people laugh. Maybe it's caring for others. These core values don't change when you retire, but the ways you express them need to change. If teaching gave you meaning in your career, how can you teach in retirement? Volunteer tutoring, teaching a class at your community center, mentoring young people in your field. Third, develop what I call the 3 pillars of purpose. Research shows that the happiest retirees have purpose from 3 different sources. Pillar 1 is contribution, some way they're making a difference or helping others. This could be volunteering, helping family members, serving on a board, mentoring, or any activity where you feel like you're contributing something valuable to the world. Pillar 2 is growth, some way they're learning and developing. This could be taking classes, learning a new skill, pursuing a hobby seriously, traveling to new places, reading extensively, or any activity that challenges you intellectually or creatively. Pillar 3 is connection, meaningful relationships and social engagement. This could be clubs, groups, regular activities with friends, time with family, or any activity that keeps you connected to other people in meaningful ways. You need all 3 pillars. Contribution alone can lead to burnout. Growth alone can feel self-indulgent. Connection alone can feel superficial. But when you have all 3, you have a stable foundation for a meaningful retirement. Fourth, start building your retirement life while you're still working. This is crucial. Don't wait until you retire to figure out what you'll do with yourself. Start now. If you think you might want to volunteer, start volunteering a few hours a month now. Try different organizations until you find one that feels meaningful. If you have a hobby you want to pursue more seriously, start dedicating time to it now. Take classes, join groups, get better at it. If you want to be more involved with your grandchildren, start building those relationships now. By the time you retire, you should already have a schedule of meaningful activities in place. You're not starting from zero. You're just increasing the time you spend on things you're already doing. Fifth, create structure and routine. One of the hidden benefits of work is that it provides structure. You know what you're doing Monday morning at 9 a.m. You have deadlines. You have a rhythm to your week. In retirement, if you don't create structure, every day feels the same. That's when people start feeling adrift. Create a weekly schedule. Not every hour needs to be planned, but you should have regular commitments and activities. Maybe Monday is your volunteer day. Tuesday you take a class. Wednesday you have coffee with friends. Thursday you work on your hobby. Friday is flexible. Saturday is family time. Sunday you attend religious services or whatever is meaningful to you. Having structure doesn't mean you're not free. It means you're intentional about how you use your freedom. Sixth, consider an encore career or phased retirement. Some of the happiest retirees I know didn't fully retire. They transitioned to what's called an encore career. This might be part-time work in your field, consulting, or even a completely different career that you find meaningful. Others do phased retirement, gradually reducing hours over several years rather than going from full-time work to zero work overnight. There's no shame in continuing to work in some capacity if it gives you purpose and you enjoy it. The key is that it should be work you want to do, not work you have to do. It's about meaning, not money. Seventh, give yourself permission to experiment. Not everything you try in retirement will work out, and that's okay. Maybe you volunteer at one organization and it's not a good fit. Try another. Maybe you take up a hobby and realize you don't actually enjoy it. Try something else. The first year or two of retirement should be a time of exploration. Try different activities. Say yes to new experiences. Figure out what resonates with you. One retiree told me, "I thought I'd love woodworking, so I set up a whole shop. Turns out I didn't enjoy it at all. I felt like I'd wasted money and time. But then I tried watercolor painting and fell in love with it. Now I paint several times a week and it brings me so much joy. I had to try the wrong thing to find the right thing." What this really means. Here's the deeper truth about this number one regret. Retirement isn't an end. It's a transition to a new chapter of life. And that new chapter needs to be as rich and meaningful as the previous chapters. The saddest retirees are those who thought retirement was about stopping work, stopping stress, stopping obligations. They focused entirely on what they were leaving behind, not on what they were moving toward. The happiest retirees are those who viewed retirement as a beginning, the beginning of a phase where they have more freedom to pursue what matters most to them. They retired to something, not just from something. A 73-year-old retired professor told me something I'll never forget. "In my career, I taught thousands of students. I thought that was my purpose, and when I retired, I thought my purpose was over. But then I started volunteering as a literacy tutor for adults. I work with people who are learning to read for the first time in their lives. I see their faces light up when they read their first sentence. That's purpose. My career gave me one kind of purpose. Retirement gave me another. I just had to be open to finding it." That's the key insight. Purpose doesn't come from your paycheck. It comes from how you use your time, who you help, what you create, what you learn, and how you connect with others. You can have as much or more purpose in retirement as you had during your career, but you have to build it intentionally. It won't just happen on its own. If you're approaching retirement, start asking yourself, what will give my life meaning when work is no longer part of it? What will get me out of bed excited in the morning? What will make me feel like I matter? Answer those questions, and you'll avoid the number one regret. So let us review what we've learned today from thousands of real retirees who've walked this path before us. Regret number 5, not having a written retirement income plan. The solution: create a clear, written strategy for generating income from your savings and review it annually. Regret number 4, neglecting health and waiting too long to enjoy retirement. The solution: prioritize experiences in your healthy years and don't be so afraid of spending that you never actually live. Regret number 3, not building a social network outside of work. The solution: start creating friendships and community connections before you retire so you have a rich social life waiting for you. Regret number 2, claiming Social Security too early. The solution: separate your retirement date from your claiming date and seriously consider delaying to maximize your lifetime benefit. And regret number 1, not retiring to something meaningful. The solution: build a portfolio of purpose, contribution, growth, and connection before you retire. Here's what strikes me about all 5 of these regrets. Every single one is completely avoidable. These aren't regrets about things outside your control: market crashes, unexpected illnesses, bad luck. These are regrets about choices, and that's actually empowering because it means you have the power to avoid them. There's a common thread running through all 5 regrets. Can you see it? Every regret comes from focusing exclusively on one dimension of retirement, usually the financial dimension, while neglecting other equally important dimensions. People planned their money, but not their purpose. They planned their budget, but not their health. They planned their investments, but not their relationships. They optimized for financial security, but forgot to plan for actually living. The retirees with the fewest regrets are those who took a holistic approach. They thought about money, yes, but they also thought about health, relationships, purpose, and meaning. They planned for the whole experience of retirement, not just the financial part. So here's what I want you to do after watching this video. First, take out a piece of paper or open a document on your computer and honestly assess where you stand on each of these 5 areas. Do you have a written income plan? If not, that's your first priority. Are you taking care of your health? If not, what's one change you can make this week? Do you have friendships and community outside of work? If not, what's one group you could join? Have you thought strategically about Social Security? If not, what's your tentative claiming strategy and why? Do you know what will give your life meaning in retirement? If not, what are 3 activities you want to explore? Second, share this video with someone you care about who's approaching retirement or recently retired. These lessons are too important to keep to yourself. Help others avoid these regrets. Third, if you found this valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We create in-depth, research-based content on retirement planning every week, and your support helps us reach more people who need this information. Here's my final thought. Every single one of these regrets came from the same root cause: waiting to plan, waiting to act, waiting to live. The retirees who told me about their regrets all said some version of the same thing. I thought I had more time, or I thought I'd deal with it later, or I didn't realize how important this was until it was too late. But you have the gift of foresight. You're learning from their experiences. You know what the pitfalls are. You still have time to make different choices. Whether you're 5 years from retirement or 5 years into it, the best time to address these issues is right now. Not next month, not next year, now. Because here's the truth: you only get one retirement. You can't go back and do it over. The decisions you make in the next few years will shape the next few decades of your life. Make them count. Avoid the regrets that thousands of others had to learn the hard way. Learn from them. Adjust your course. Plan holistically. And create the retirement you actually want, one without regrets. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a longer video, but these topics deserve more than surface-level discussion. Your retirement deserves more than surface-level planning. In the comments, I'd love to hear from you. If you're already retired, what's something you're glad you did or wish you'd done differently? If you're approaching retirement, which of these 5 regrets resonates most with you? Let's learn from each other. And remember, every regret we discussed today is avoidable. You have the knowledge, you have the time. All you need now is action. Here's to a retirement with no regrets, one filled with purpose, connection, health, security, and meaning. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next video.